The stories of Nazi atrocities and genocide are well known. The entire world studies the horrors of the Holocaust, war crimes, and the ideology of the Third Reich. But there is one part of history that has long remained in the shadows: the stories of the wives of Nazi leaders. These women were married to some of the most terrible figures in human history. But who were they? Did they know about their husbands' crimes? And most importantly, how did they survive the war and what happened to them afterward? Today we reveal the little-known stories of 5 women who lived beside the architects of the Third Reich. Their stories raise complex questions about guilt, complicity, and the fate of those connected to Nazism through marriage. 1. Ilse Hess, loyal until the end. Meeting Rudolf Hess. Let's begin with the story of Ilse Hess, wife of Rudolf Hess, Adolf Hitler's deputy and one of the most influential figures of the Third Reich. Ilse and Rudolf met in the early 1920s at the height of the birth of the National Socialist movement in Germany. It was a time of change, a time of revolutionary ideas and political upheaval. Ilse joined the Nazi Party in 1921, but after it was banned, she left. However, her dedication to the ideals did not diminish. She rejoined in 1925 when the party restored its activities. Rudolf Hess was initially cautious about romantic relations with Ilse. He doubted, he hesitated, but it was Ilse who played a decisive role in his fate. She introduced him to Adolf Hitler at one of the social gatherings that the Führer often attended. Hitler was charmed. He saw potential in Rudolf Hess, a loyal soldier of his ideology, and even more. Hitler himself actively facilitated their marriage. This was not simply a meeting of 2 young people. It was a political arrangement approved by Hitler himself. Marriage under Hitler's blessing. The wedding took place on December 20, 1927 in Munich. And who stood beside them as an honored guest? Adolf Hitler himself. He was a witness to their marriage, sealing their union with his presence. A few years later, when Ilse and Rudolf had a son, Wolf, in 1937, Hitler again showed his favor. He became the godfather of the boy. Imagine this: your child baptized by the Führer himself, your husband his right hand in government. You live at the center of power, in the very heart of the Nazi regime. Ilse remained a convinced supporter of the regime throughout the war. Her devotion was absolute, unconditional. And when her husband committed one of the strangest and most desperate acts in the history of Nazism, a solo flight to Scotland to attempt to negotiate peace with Britain, she defended him. The Scottish Mission. A desperate attempt. May 1941, Rudolf Hess, the second most powerful man in the Nazi hierarchy, voluntarily takes off from Germany in a fighter bomber. His destination is Scotland, where he hopes to meet the Duke of Hamilton and negotiate a separate peace with Britain. It was a mad, bold attempt that failed. Hess was arrested by the British. But what did Ilse do? Instead of renouncing her husband, condemning his act as betrayal, she defended him. She claimed his intentions were noble, that he was trying to save the world to avoid further war. Her loyalty was astonishing. Life after war, internment, and isolation. When the war ended in 1945, Ilse awaited the inevitable: arrest. Her husband was tried at the Nuremberg trials and was sentenced to life imprisonment in Spandau prison. He lived there behind bars until his death in 1987. Ilse, however, was interned. She was sent to an internment camp in Augsburg along with other wives of Nazi leaders who were either convicted or executed at the Nuremberg trials. When she was finally released, she tried to start a new life. She moved to Allgäu and opened a small boarding house there. By 1955, she had already gotten back on her feet, tried to live an ordinary life, but her past haunted her. Remaining years, fighting for her husband's legacy. Ilse remained a convinced National Socialist. She did not renounce her beliefs, she did not repent, she did not reconsider her views. Instead, she devoted her remaining years to supporting her husband and preserving his legacy. She participated in the work of the organization Stille Hilfe, Silent Help, a secret network of assistance for arrested, condemned, and fugitive SS members. This organization helped Nazi war criminals evade justice and hide from authorities. In 1952, Ilse published her controversial book, England, Nuremberg, Spandau, Ein Schicksal in Briefen, England, Nuremberg, Spandau, A Fate in Letters. The book contained correspondence with known admirers of Hitler, people who also had not renounced Nazi ideology. Her final years were devoted to attempts to secure her husband's release from Spandau prison. She wrote letters, filed petitions, appealed to various authorities, but Rudolf Hess remained there, in solitude, until he died in 1987. Ilse Hess died on September 7, 1995, leaving behind a complex legacy inextricably linked to the history of the Third Reich. She never renounced her beliefs, never acknowledged the guilt of the regime she served. 2. Margarete Himmler, nurse and accomplice. From medicine to Nazism. Margarete Himmler was the wife of Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, one of the architects of the Holocaust, the man responsible for the deaths of millions. But Margarete's story does not begin with Nazism, it begins with mercy. Margarete was trained as a nurse with the noble purpose of saving lives. She worked in World War I, helping the wounded, saving lives. After the war, she continued her medical work, working in hospitals of the German Red Cross. In fact, thanks to her father's financial support, Margarete even managed her own private clinic. She was a respected professional, a woman who dedicated her life to helping people. But all this would change in 1927. Meeting Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler is on a lecture tour across Germany. At one of these lectures, he meets Margarete. His attraction to her is immediate. Blue eyes, blonde hair, exactly the type of woman who corresponded to Nazi ideals of Aryan beauty. They married in July 1928. But this was not simply a marriage for love. Himmler initially had misgivings about the marriage. There were several reasons: the age difference, the fact that Margarete was previously married, and her Protestant faith. In Himmler's family, which was Catholic, this caused some opposition. But the family eventually accepted the marriage. And in 1929, on August 8th, they welcomed their daughter Gudrun into the world, active participant in the regime. Margarete was far from a passive victim of circumstances. She joined the Nazi Party in 1928 and actively participated in regime activities. She organized gatherings of the wives of high-ranking SS officers. These were not simply tea parties. These were meetings where questions of ideology, raising children in the spirit of National Socialism, loyalty to the party were discussed. Margarete tried to lead these women, to be an authority for them. But there was a problem. Despite her position as the wife of Heinrich Himmler, she was extremely unpopular among other wives of Nazi leaders. At the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg in 1938, other women collectively refused to follow her lead. It was a public humiliation. Witness to occupation. but her true role in the regime was much darker. By the end of 1939, Margarete was overseeing a network of Red Cross hospitals throughout the Berlin-Brandenburg region. Her role sent her on inspection missions to occupied territories. In March 1940, Margarete visited Poland, a country that was under Nazi occupation. She walked through Poznan, Łódź, Warsaw, and in her diary remained records of what she saw. Records that reveal her worldview. Then I was in Poznan, Łódź, and Warsaw. This Jewish rabble, Poles, most of them don't look like human beings, and the dirt is indescribable. It's an incredible job trying to create order there. These were the words of a woman who saw the results of occupation, saw people in ghettos, saw the conditions in which Poles and Jews lived under Nazi control. And her reaction was not sympathy, not horror, but contempt for the victims. Thanks to her efforts, Heinrich Himmler achieved the rank of colonel in the German Red Cross, a position that gave him additional authority. Betrayal and disappointment. In February 1945, as the war was coming to an end, Margarete wrote a letter to her husband's brother, Gebhard Himmler. How wonderful that he has been called to great tasks and is equal to them. All of Germany is looking to him. But the reality was quite different. In 1941, Margarete discovered a terrible truth. Her husband, Heinrich Himmler, was involved in a secret affair with his secretary. And not just an affair, they had 2 children together. Margarete's marriage had effectively ended years before, but she either didn't know about it or pretended not to know. After the war trial and exile. When the war ended in 1945, Margarete faced numerous investigations. Western occupiers wanted to know how much knowledge she had of her husband's crimes. She denied everything. She said she knew nothing. She begged to be recognized as innocent, asked to be allowed to distance herself from Nazism and her husband. The investigation took a long time, but in 1953 a verdict was handed down. Margarete was found guilty of being an accomplice to the Nazi regime, profiting from it. She was sentenced to 30 days of hard labor. After her release, her voting rights and pension eligibility were stripped. Her life was destroyed. New identity. Margarete Boden. Margarete decided to completely remake her life. She took a new name, Margarete Boden, and lived under this false identity, trying to forget her past and make others forget about her. She died in 1967, never coming to terms with the fact that she was part of one of the worst regimes in history. Her story is the story of a woman who tried to hide from her past, but never fully managed to escape it. 3. Lina Heydrich. Brilliant and ruthless. Political education. Lina Heydrich was somewhat different. Her path to Nazism did not begin with her husband, but with her own brother. Her brother Hans was a fervent member of the Nazi Party and the SA, stormtroopers. His enthusiasm for National Socialist ideas was contagious. It was thanks to his influence that Lina began to take interest in the movement. In 1929, at a Nazi rally, Lina heard Adolf Hitler give one of his famous speeches. It was a revelation for her. She was charmed, inspired by his words, his vision of the future. She immediately joined the Nazi Party, meeting Reinhard Heydrich. But fate had prepared a meeting for Lina that would change her entire life. A dance evening at the rowing club in Kiel. Lina is 19 years old. At the ball, she meets Naval Lieutenant Reinhard Heydrich. Reinhard Heydrich was an unusual man, brilliant, ambitious, cold-blooded. He immediately noticed the young, beautiful, and ideologically dedicated girl. They announced their engagement on December 18, 1930. It seemed like the beginning of a happy life. But the problem was that Reinhard was not entirely honest. Scandal and career collapse. Soon after the engagement, a scandalous story emerged. Reinhard was accused of conduct unbecoming to an officer and a gentleman, for violating a marriage promise to another woman with whom he had been involved 6 months before his engagement to Lina. It was a serious accusation in the Naval Academy. Reinhard was dismissed from the Navy in April 1931. His military career ended before it began. He was an unemployed young man with a stain on his honor. Salvation through the SS. But it was Lina who saved him. She suggested to him the idea, why not join the SS? It was a young and growing organization where new ideas and new opportunities flourished. Reinhard agreed, and it turned out that he was a genius at organization. Heinrich Himmler, the commander of the SS, immediately saw the potential in Reinhard. He was appointed head of the newly created SS Intelligence Service, later known as the SD, Sicherheitsdienst. Reinhard Heydrich became one of the most powerful men in the Nazi repression apparatus. He organized the persecution of political enemies, Jews, Gypsies, Communists. His name stood behind some of the worst crimes of the regime. Rewards and privileges. As recognition of his dedication to the Nazi cause, Adolf Hitler personally gave Lina a large estate in rural Bohemia. It was a vast property, with enough space not only for residence but for darker purposes. On this estate, according to testimony, Lina kept prisoners for forced labor, and moreover, it is alleged that she physically abused them, tortured them. Lina was not just the wife of an executioner, she was an executioner herself. Flight and escape from justice. April 1945. The Soviet Red Army is approaching. The Nazi regime is falling. Lina and Reinhard, along with millions of other Germans, flee before the advancing Soviet army. But in June 1942, Reinhard was killed as a result of an assassination organized by the Czech underground. Lina became a widow, but not a helpless widow. She was the widow of a man responsible for enormous numbers of deaths. After the war, however, Lina escaped the justice that caught others. In the denazification proceedings, she was acquitted. The court ruled that she was not responsible for her husband's crimes, fighting for a pension and protecting his legacy. But this was only the beginning of her attempts to rewrite history. Lina sued the West German government in 1956 and 1959. Her case was controversial. She demanded a pension as the widow of an officer despite her husband's crimes. And incredibly, she won both cases. She received a pension. This was a decision that provoked huge objections. How can the wife of one of the chief architects of the Holocaust receive a pension from the state? How can the state pay her for her loyalty to a man responsible for millions of deaths? But Lina continued. She managed her first husband's former summer house on the island of Fehmarn, turning it into a restaurant and inn. When a fire occurred, she moved elsewhere. Memoirs and defensive reputation. In 1976, Lina published a memoir titled Life with a War Criminal. This was an unusual choice of title, but the contents of the book were no less strange. Instead of acknowledging her husband's crimes, Lina tried to justify him, defend his memory, rewrite history. She tirelessly defended Reinhard Heydrich's reputation until her death at the age of 74 on August 14, 1985. She never admitted guilt, never came to terms with history. 4. Emmy Goering, First Lady of the Third Reich. Marriage to Hermann Goering. Emmy Goering was married to Hermann Goering, chief of the Luftwaffe, Air Force, one of the most influential and wealthy Nazi leaders. They married on April 10, 1935. Interestingly, Emmy herself never requested membership in the Nazi Party, but in 1938, as an unusual Christmas present, she was granted party membership. She was simply enrolled as a party member without her direct request. This gift symbolizes her position. She was there because she was a wife, but her role was actually far more active. First Lady and conflict with Eva Braun. Before the start of World War II, Emmy served as hostess at many state functions. She was the face of the regime, representing it at receptions, at official dinners, at diplomatic meetings. Emmy called herself the First Lady of the Third Reich. This title reflected her understanding of her role in the regime. She was not simply a wife, she was a symbol of Nazi greatness, an embodiment of ideal Aryan womanhood. But this caused conflict. Eva Braun, Hitler's companion and later his wife in the final days of the war, did not agree with this assessment. Eva believed that she should be the First Lady, not Emmy. Emmy openly ignored Eva, treated her with contempt, demonstrated her position to her. Hitler noticed this. He summoned Hermann Goering and ordered him to teach Emmy to treat Eva with respect. The result was that Emmy was excluded from Hitler's famous Bavarian retreat, the Berghof. This was a humiliation for her, a demonstration of her place in the hierarchy. Wealth and luxury. Despite this conflict, Emmy lived a life of unimaginable luxury. Her husband, Hermann Goering, owned palaces, estates, and castles throughout Austria, Germany, and Poland. Where did this property come from? It was taken, stolen, confiscated from Jews, from enemies of the regime, from people who were targeted as enemies of the Third Reich. Goering was one of the most plundering Nazi leaders. His personal wealth accumulated through robbery and violence. And Emmy enjoyed this wealth. She wore jewels, traveled between estates, lived a life that most people could only dream of. The birth of Etta. When Emmy and Hermann had a daughter, Etta, Hermann decided to mark this event in the way only Hermann Goering could, with the greatest display of power. He ordered 500 Luftwaffe aircraft to fly over Berlin in honor of the birth. 500 fighter planes, forming geometric patterns, making the roar of their engines heard, demonstrating the power of Germany's air force. And then Goering uttered words that show the depravity of Nazi ideology. "I would have ordered double that number if it had been a boy." A girl was worth less than a boy. Even as a newborn, her value in the Nazi system was determined by her sex. End of war and prison. When the war ended in 1945, Emmy and Hermann faced justice. Hermann Goering was tried at Nuremberg, convicted, and later committed suicide in prison. Emmy was arrested and tried by a German denazification court. The court found her guilty of being a Nazi. She was sentenced to 1 year of imprisonment. After her release, 30% of her wealth was confiscated. She was forbidden to perform on stage for 5 years. Her life was destroyed. New life in Munich. After her release, Emmy found a small apartment in Munich. This was a huge drop in status for a woman who had lived in palaces and estates. She wrote an autobiography titled, My Life with Goering. In this book, she tries to justify her life, explain her choices, rewrite history. Emmy Goering died in Munich on June 8, 1973, at the age of 80. Her life was a journey from luxury to disgrace, from First Lady to a forgotten person hiding in a small apartment in a provincial city. Conclusion. Guilt, complicity, and legacy. The stories of these 5 women raise complex questions that have no simple answers. Were they guilty? Yes and no. They did not commit war crimes personally, but they lived with people who committed them. They enjoyed privileges that came from violence and robbery. They knew, or chose not to know, about their husbands' crimes. Were they victims? In a sense, yes. They were caught in a system they did not create, in a history they did not write. But this does not mean they were innocent. Victimhood does not make you innocent if you participate in crimes through your own actions. What does this tell us about the nature of Nazism? It shows that Nazism was not simply the work of one person or even one group of people. It was a system that affected everyone, men and women, leaders and followers, active participants and passive beneficiaries. And it is a warning for us. History can repeat itself. New regimes, new ideologies can emerge, and if we are not vigilant, if we do not ask questions, if we simply remain silent and accept, we may find ourselves in the same situation. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for new videos. Thank you for watching and see you next time.